All right, welcome to another deep dive. I'm Brad, and as always, we're gonna take a deep dive into a topic that one of our listeners has requested, and we've got a stack of sources here ready to go.
And I'm Jennifer. Hi, everyone.
So Jennifer, why don't you tell the listeners what we're diving into today?
Today we're going to be talking about laneway houses in Vancouver.
Laneway houses.
Specifically, if you're considering building one, whether it's for family or as an investment.
Right. And you know what? Our listeners sent in this guide from the city of Vancouver, and let me tell you, it is dense.
It's a lot to get through.
It's a lot, and that's why we're here. We're going to break it all down and find the most important stuff. So are you ready to dive in?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. So I guess we should start with the basics, like what is a laneway house? Essentially, it's a small detached house at the back of a property,
Okay.
accessed from the lane.
So like a little mini house in your backyard.
Exactly.
I like that.
And it's for a single household, so that could be for rental or family.
That's a good point. Could be for either. It could be for either, and you can also have a laneway house and a secondary suite in the main house.
Oh, wow.
So if you're thinking about rental income, that could be a good option.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. So not every backyard is laneway house ready.
Right, I can imagine that.
There are some rules about your property and whether it's eligible.
Okay, so what are some of those rules? What do we need to know?
Well, first off, you need lane access, which makes sense.
Right, you got to get to it.
That's the whole point.
Yeah.
You also need a certain site depth. So your lot needs to be deep enough for both the backyard and the laneway house,
Makes sense.
which can extend up to 35 feet back from the lane.
Wow. That's longer than some buses.
Yeah. So that's something to think about.
Yeah.
Width is also a factor. So there's a minimum width, usually 32 feet.
Okay.
And then you also need to think about firefighter access.
Firefighter access.
Yeah.
Okay, I would never have thought of that.
Yeah. So there needs to be a clear path at least 3 feet wide from the street to the entrance of the laneway house.
Oh, wow. I never would have thought of that.
Yeah. So it can get complicated pretty quickly.
Yeah, I had a friend who was really excited about building a laneway house and then realized their lot was just too shallow.
Right. Yeah.
So you really got to double check your property details early on.
Absolutely. You don't want to get your hopes up and then realize you can't even build it.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not just about what you want, though. It's also about fitting into the existing neighborhood, right?
Yeah. Well,
Like being a good neighbor.
right. And the guide talks a lot about this whole neighborliness and livability thing.
Right.
What does that even mean?
So there are a bunch of design features that they recommend in the guide to kind of enhance these qualities.
Okay, that makes sense.
So one of the first things is trees.
Trees.
Vancouver loves its trees.
Yes.
Yes. So you need an arborist's report if you're going to be building a laneway house. That's going to identify any significant trees that need to be preserved.
That could impact the whole design then.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, like where you can even put the laneway house.
Wow.
You also need to think about setbacks and massing. So there are required setbacks from the lane and the main house.
Okay, so how far back are we talking?
So from the lane, it has to be at least 3 feet. And then from the main house, it's 16 feet.
16 feet.
Yeah, so you need a pretty deep lot for that.
Yeah.
If you're going to be doing a 2-story laneway house, there are even more strict rules.
Really?
Yeah, the upper floor area has limits and even stricter setbacks.
Okay.
Again, it's to minimize the impact on the neighbors.
Right. Being a good neighbor.
Yeah, and then windows are interesting too.
Window.
Yeah.
Mm.
So upper level windows that face side yards and gardens, they have to be kind of small or use like translucent glass.
Oh, for privacy.
Yeah.
Interesting. So no giant picture windows overlooking your neighbor's barbecue.
Exactly. All right, so we're back and we're diving even deeper into laneway houses in Vancouver.
I'm ready to go deeper.
So let's talk about parking.
Yeah. Parking in Vancouver is always a hot topic.
Boys.
What do we need to know for laneway houses?
So you need to have at least one unenclosed, uncovered parking space for the laneway house.
Okay.
Ideally, it should be permeable, so like allowing water to seep through.
So no hiding your fancy sports car collection in the laneway house.
Right.
Okay.
Got to keep it open and exposed.
All right. So what about other outdoor space? You know, like if you want to have a barbecue or just hang out.
Yeah, so you need to have some kind of outdoor living space.
Okay.
Either a patio, at least 40 square feet,
Right.
or a roof deck.
A roof deck. That sounds cool.
And it has to face the lane or the flanking street,
Oh, interesting. Not the backyard.
not the backyard and not your neighbor's yard.
Why is that?
It's all about encouraging interaction and preventing the laneway house from feeling too isolated.
Right, I can see that.
Yeah. So facing the lane or street kind of promotes that sense of community and connection.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
All right, so let's move on to the inside of the Laneway house.
All right.
What kind of living space are we talking about here?
So on a standard 33-foot by 122-foot lot, a laneway house is usually a studio or a one-bedroom.
Okay.
If you have a bigger lot, you might be able to fit 2 bedrooms in there,
Right.
but there are size requirements too.
Oh, okay. What do you mean?
So there's a minimum size for shared living spaces, like the kitchen, living, and dining area.
Makes sense. Got to have room to move around.
Yeah. So that needs to be at least 180 square feet.
And what about bedrooms?
For bedrooms, all units except studios need to have at least 1 bedroom that's 90 square feet.
Okay, that's good to know.
Yeah. So it can get complicated pretty quickly.
Yeah. All these
Yeah.
rules and regulations and design guidelines and minimum sizes.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot to keep track of.
It is. So it's probably a good idea to have some experts on your side.
Absolutely.
Architects, designers, experienced builders who can guide you through the whole process.
Yeah. And speaking of costs, that's something to think about too.
Yeah, let's talk money. What are the main costs involved in building one of these things?
Well, you've got what are called hard costs, which are things like materials, labor permits, utility connections,
Okay.
and those can vary depending on, the size and finishes.
Right, like a simple studio is going to be less expensive than a fancy two-story, two-bedroom.
Exactly.
Okay, so those are hard costs. What about other costs?
Yeah. There are also soft costs, which people sometimes forget about,
Okay.
like architectural and engineering fees,
Oh, yeah.
surveys, soil testing, landscaping.
Yeah. It's easy to overlook those.
It is.
Okay, so if someone's thinking about a laneway house as an investment,
Right.
how do they figure out what they could potentially rent it for?
So you need to do your research.
Okay.
Look at comparable rentals in the area, online listings.
Right.
Maybe even talk to some real estate agents who specialize in laneway houses.
Good idea.
Yeah.
Location's probably pretty important too.
Oh, yeah. Location is key.
Like a laneway house in a trendy area close to amenities and transit that's going to get higher rent.
Absolutely. And the quality of the laneway house itself matters too.
Right. Makes sense.
So if it's well-designed, well-maintained, modern features, that's going to justify a higher price tag.
Okay, so you've got this rental income coming in, but how long does it typically take for a laneway house to pay for itself?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
And it really depends on a lot of things.
Right.
Like your initial investment rental income, ongoing expenses.
Makes sense.
But generally, laneway houses in Vancouver can generate a pretty good return on investment over time.
So it's not a get-rich-quick scheme.
No.
It's more of a long-term investment strategy.
Yeah. Think of it like planting a tree.
I like that.
It takes time to grow and bear fruit, but the rewards are worth it in the long run.
Okay, so we've talked about the positives, but building a laneway house is a big undertaking. Are there any downsides or challenges we should be thinking about?
Yeah, I mean, it's not all sunshine and roses. One thing is just managing the construction process.
Okay.
It can be disruptive, especially if you're living on the property.
Yeah, noise dust.
Yeah, and then you've got to think about your neighbors.
Right, not everyone's going to be thrilled about having a laneway house next door.
Yeah, so communication is key.
Yeah,
Being thoughtful in your design, being willing to compromise.
makes sense.
And then there are financial risks, too.
Okay, like what?
Well, you could have cost overruns during construction,
Oh, right.
like if there are hidden utility lines or difficult soil conditions.
So important to have a contingency fund.
Absolutely.
And what about ongoing maintenance?
Yeah, you've got to think about repairs, landscaping, property taxes.
Okay.
And if you're renting it out, then property management fees, potential vacancy periods.
Wow, it's a lot to juggle.
It is.
So building a laneway house, whether it's for family or as an investment,
Right.
it's a complex decision.
It is.
And it's important to go into it with your eyes wide open.
Absolutely.
Do your research, get a good team on your side, and be prepared for the unexpected.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground, but there's one crucial piece of the puzzle left.
What's that?
Permits.
Ah, yes, the permits.
That's where things can get really tricky.
They can.
But don't worry, we're going to break it all down in the next part of our deep dive, so stick around.
And we'll make sense of those regulations.
Okay, so we're back, and it's time to talk permits.
Ah, yes. The permit's the part everyone loves.
Not really, but it's a necessary evil.
Yeah.
Right. So, Jennifer, walk us through this process. What are the essential permits we need to build a laneway house in Vancouver?
So the big one is the Combined Development and Building Permit, which they call a DB permit.
Okay, DB permit.
And this covers both the zoning and building aspects of your project.
So it's like a one-stop shop for approvals.
Exactly. Yeah, you don't need to apply for separate permits, which is great.
Saves a lot of time.
Yeah.
So what exactly needs to be included in this DB permit application?
Well, you need detailed architectural drawings, structural plans, energy efficiency reports, a survey of your property.
Wow. Sounds like a lot of paperwork.
It is.
Well,
And this is where having an architect or a house designer can be really helpful.
right, because they can make sure everything's done correctly.
Exactly. They can help you navigate the whole permitting process.
So it's worth the investment.
Yeah.
Okay, earlier we talked about zoning regulations. How do those come into play here?
So zoning regulations are basically the rules about what you can and can't build on your property.
Right.
Things like setbacks, height limits, maximum floor area.
So the city's trying to make sure your laneway house fits in with the neighborhood.
Exactly.
Doesn't negatively impact your neighbors.
Right. And the development permit part of your application ensures that your project follows all these zoning rules.
Okay, so let's say you've got your design, all your documents ready to go. You submit your DB permit application. What happens next?
So the City of Vancouver has a team of planners who review each application.
I bet they're busy with all these laneway house applications.
Yeah. Laneway houses are pretty popular these days.
Right.
So they check for compliance with zoning requirements, building codes, safety standards, all that good stuff.
Okay, so they're making sure everything's up to code.
Exactly.
Well, what if my application gets rejected?
So the city will usually give you feedback on why your application was rejected.
Okay.
And then you can work with your designer to make revisions and address those issues.
So it's not the end of the world.
No, not at all.
Okay, good to know.
Yeah.
Well, Jennifer, this has been incredibly helpful. You've really demystified this whole permitting process.
Oh, yeah, I could help.
So there you have it, folks. We've explored the world of laneway houses in Vancouver, from design and costs to construction and permits.
Hopefully you feel more informed and ready to tackle your own laneway house project.
And if you're looking for a great builder, we highly recommend Corvell Homes.
Yeah. Check out their website, corvillehomes.com.
And be sure to talk to Gordy. He's their laneway house expert, and he'll be happy to answer any questions you have.
Absolutely.
All right, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into laneway houses. And until next time, keep exploring and keep learning.
See you next time.